the good white people, love to try to distance themselves from the problematic white people.
They do not want you or your kids to be educated.
Did you say there's no free speech in America?
Oh yeah, there is no free speech.
Hey guys, I'm Brad Polumbo, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome back to Brad vs. TikTok, where I break down the craziest ideas going viral on the Clock app. When I do these videos, I'm taking one for the team and subjecting myself to true mental torture of scrolling through this hellscape of an app, so please do reward that if you enjoy this video with a like, a comment, or maybe even consider subscribing. Now, let's hop into it, because some of these are doozies.
White people, I need y'all to listen, okay? When a white person is doing something questionable, maybe could be perceived as racist, for example, your first instinct should not be to block them. And the reason I say this is because people who deem themselves like the good white people love to try to distance themselves from the problematic white people. The issue with this, though, is that if the good white people are distancing themselves from the problematic white people, then whose responsibility is it to come collect the problematic white people and to help them be better? You cannot abandon the white people who are showing their ass. Okay, you just can't. It is your responsibility as the ally, the co-conspirator, whatever it is you all are calling yourselves now. It is your responsibility to stick around and to show up and to do the work alongside the problematic white people.
What did I just watch? I don't know about y'all other white people, but I have not started calling myself a co-conspirator. Look, on one hand, I'm glad that this progressive activist actually thinks that problematic people, which I'm sure she defines very loosely, can actually be redeemed because, oftentimes with these progressive types and cancel culture, they just want to cancel or destroy or write people off who have outdated or offensive beliefs in their view. But the deeper assumption behind this video is really toxic. This idea of collective guilt on the basis of skin pigment is just incredibly noxious. I mean, I have no responsibility for the actions, the things that people look like me do in the past or do today just because we have similar skin pigment. I had no control over any of their actions, and I have no responsibility for whatever problematic things that they're saying or doing today. People are individuals who happen to be of a certain race or ethnicity, not part of some collective racial blob. I mean, we'd all agree that seeing a black person committing a crime and then attributing that to the black community or all black people would be racist. Yet when progressive TikTokers apply that kind of logic to white people, it's somehow not. Of course, we should be striving to end racism where it still exists, but doing that requires breaking down the barriers between groups and de-emphasizing racial identities and recognizing that everybody is just an individual, not reinforcing those divides in the name of some perverse sense of social justice. Up next, an interesting take on education.
The school choice sounds really awesome, but it's really nothing but a Trojan horse to usher in an all-private education system, which can, by the way, decline to admit your kid for any reason. And in a society with only private education, if you are not born into wealth, then you are probably not going to be able to go to school. They're trying to create a caste system where if you're born into one of these lower classes, you cannot use education as a means to move yourself up the ladder, which I guess for them is all part of the plan.
Put down the crack pipe, bro. Basically everything he just said is wrong and is just outright misinformation or factually untrue about school choice. So you guys know, school choice is a education policy favored by many on the right, but also many Democrats, many people from all walks of life, including huge swaths of the black community and other racial minorities. It allows taxpayer money dedicated to education to go to a student and their family to then be used at whatever school they want, rather than going to their local public school by default and the money just goes there even if that kid is not a good fit at that school, even if that school is decrepit and failing, and even if that kid would be better served at a public or private charter school or a private academy. School choice doesn't end or defund public education in any way unless those parents and those kids decide that local public schools aren't the best fit for them and choose to go somewhere else. Where public schools are doing a good job, they wouldn't be defunded at all. The idea that it's all just part of some nefarious plan to make sure only rich people's kids can go to school is just the opposite of the truth. Rich families already have school choice. They can and do send their kids to private school, and they just pay double. They have to pay taxes that go to the kids' education that get sent to the public school, but then they also, on top of that, pay the private school tuition. They've already got the school choice, folks. School choice is literally aimed at helping extend choice and opportunity to the poor, working, and middle-class folks who can't afford to pay twice for education. It's kids whose parents couldn't afford to send them to a private school who are able to go under school choice. Which, if you ask me, sounds like something progressives should support. Up next, this anti-capitalist TikTok will make you lose brain cells. Like, honestly, full viewer discretion. You will get dumber from watching this.
You ask a socialist why they hate capitalism, they'll give you a bunch of sensible reasons. Like it creates extreme poverty, encourages the rich to steal from the poor, privatizes natural resources, incentivizes carbon emissions leading to the destruction of the environment, leads to unemployment and hunger and wealth inequality that concentrates capital in fewer and fewer hands, and ultimately everything becomes unaffordable for everyone except the wealthy.
Hey, put down the crack pipe. You've had enough. You do not need another hit. The idea that capitalism creates extreme poverty is so nuts. Actually, poverty and the lack of abundance is the starting point of humankind, of human history. And the spread of global trade and capitalism has corresponded with enormous reductions in global extreme poverty. The rich can't steal from the poor under capitalism. They have to provide a product or service that meets someone's needs to make money. Unless they collude with the government to steal tax money and get special subsidies. That's big government, not the free market. And under socialism, if elites want to steal your money, they just have to suck up to the right politicians. As for carbon emissions, I mean, China is literally the biggest CO2 emitter in the world, and they're not exactly a bastion of laissez-faire free market capitalism, are they? Capitalism could even help solve climate change through the adoption of nuclear power, which has zero emissions, is affordable and safe. But governments around the world basically block and throttle the development of that technology. There's just so much to unpack here. My goodness. I mean, the idea that capitalism creates unemployment, no, babe, no. The US consistently has much lower unemployment levels than our much more socialist-leaning European counterparts. That's because thriving free markets try to employ as much labor as possible, as efficiently as possible. It's government benefits in the welfare state that actually subsidize and promote unemployment, not capitalism. As far as capitalism being why things are unaffordable, you got that one backwards, babe. The most expensive products are the ones in the industries that are the most highly regulated and subsidized by the government: healthcare, education, and housing. Meanwhile, the most affordable things are often found in the freest markets, like TVs, toys, or computers. And capitalism has literally made it to the point where your average person walking around has a supercomputer in their pocket. Other than that, go off. Up next, we got more progressive podcast bros.
Americans need to abandon this notion that you only win if other people are losing.
Yeah.
It is toxic to the working class. It is anti-materialism. We all win if we're winning together. Things like student loans, things like strikes being successful, those are good for the entire working class. And if we hang on to this idea that other working class people have to lose in order for us to win, the elite will never be challenged. We are sacrificing ourselves. We are giving ourselves to them by always fighting amongst ourselves. Student debt cancellation is good for everybody. And you gotta find a way to rationalize that to yourself, even if you hate the liberals that are trying to do it for you.
Oh my gosh, I just lost brain cells listening to all that. I mean, these progressive podcast bros, they really think they're doing something, huh? Maybe learn basic econ before popping off there, king. There is no such thing as a free lunch, and you can't just cancel trillions of dollars in student loan debt without that money coming from somewhere, and in this case, coming from the pockets of taxpayers, directly or indirectly, who then have to absorb the financial burden of all that loan money that's supposed to come back into the government's coffers. Meanwhile, that relief is going mostly to relatively affluent people because college graduates tend to be better off. One study even found that full student debt cancellation would give 6 times more benefit to the top 20% of income earners than the bottom 20%. So you're literally advocating for a multi-trillion-dollar taxpayer bailout for relatively affluent elites, in part at the expense of working-class taxpayers, and claiming there are no downsides and everybody wins. Well, the story here, guys, don't hit the crack pipe before you podcast. Up next, some insane communist propaganda, as you might expect on the good old TikTok.
Did you say there's no free speech in America?
Oh yeah, there is no free speech. Can you say the N-word in your channel?
I can't, no.
Yeah, why?
Can you do that in China?
Yeah, I can say the N-word whenever I want. It's freedom of speech. You should go to China.
This insane propaganda has more than 4 million views on TikTok. I guess that makes sense because the company that owns TikTok, ByteDance, ultimately answers to the Chinese Communist Party, but wow, that's some blatant propaganda and misinformation you got. You shouldn't, but you literally can say the N-word in America. People might get mad at you, but the government's not going to arrest you. They're not going to punish or sanction you by the state. Hate speech is protected under the First Amendment. Meanwhile, in China, if you criticize the government, they will lock you up or disappear you. And they control all media and persecute minority religions. America's certainly not perfect when it comes to free speech, but my gosh, the idea that China is somehow superior to us in that regard is one of the most insane things I've ever heard on TikTok. And that's saying something. All right, guys, I can't do any more of these today without losing brain cells that I'll never get back. If you enjoyed this video, maybe drop a like, comment, consider subscribing, and regardless, I'll see you all next time.